Sajid's story did not begin with poverty. On the contrary, he lived a carefree life with his family in a sturdy 3-story house designed and built by his father. The home resonated with cheerful laughter, delicious aromas from the kitchen, and a sense of financial security. His father worked for a private company, ensuring a stable future for his wife and children. But one fateful day, everything collapsed. Tragedy struck suddenly. His father unexpectedly lost consciousness, and at just 35 years old, his life was tragically cut short, leaving the family utterly unprotected. The house, once a symbol of love and prosperity, transformed into a prison of bitter memories and overwhelming bills. Yet, more terrifying than the pain of loss was the feeling of utter helplessness. Sajid's mother, accustomed to her husband's care, was left alone with 2 children and a precarious future. She was only 27, an age when many dream of a bright future. But she could no longer indulge in dreams. Her world had become a daily struggle for survival. Initially, she hoped for support. Friends, relatives, neighbors, it seemed everyone was there in the first few days. But as weeks passed, visits became less frequent, and words of sympathy faded. Doors that were once open now closed. It was then she realized a harsh truth of life: in times of trouble, even loved ones can become strangers. Days turned into an endless battle against a grim reality. The financial compensation from her husband's company was meager, barely enough to last a short while. As debts mounted and the pantry emptied, the atmosphere in the house, once a peaceful sanctuary, grew increasingly tense. Her children's desperate gazes pierced her, demanding a solution she didn't possess. Hunger crept in unnoticed, first as small reductions in portions to make food last longer. Then it became more brutal. The mother ate less so her children could eat, and nights were spent to the rumbling of her stomach and anxious thoughts. Sajid began to understand that his childhood was over. He was no longer just a child, but part of a family desperately fighting for survival. Time, however, waited for no one. The money ran out, leaving no choice. Sajid's mother realized that to save her children, she would have to find work. But the world outside their home proved harsh. What could a young woman do without experience or support? She knew no one would come to their aid. And so, she took a desperate step. She plunged into the unknown to fight for her family. With a broken heart and an exhausted soul, she made a decision that would forever change her family's destiny. Yet, what happened next was not merely a struggle for survival. It was the beginning of something incredible, for fate was preparing a surprise that would forever alter Sajid's life. The city buzzed with a frantic rhythm, but for Sajid and his mother, each day was a test of endurance. Streets, once so familiar, now seemed alien and hostile. The woman, accustomed to her husband's protection, had to confront the world alone. The scorching sun burned her skin as she walked from house to house, knocking on unfamiliar doors in search of work. Some slammed the door shut as soon as she began to speak. Others laughed, as if it were amusing to see a young, desperate woman begging for mercy. But she had no choice. After countless rejections, she finally found work as a maid. The pay was meager, barely enough for food. Yet, one job was not enough. In the quiet of the night, while her children slept on an old mattress, she felt her hands burn from scrubbing floors. The next day, a new battle awaited her: closed doors, humiliation, and futile attempts. And it was then that Sajid, who had never known want, experienced true hunger for the first time, not fleeting, but a deep, burning ache that settled within him. His stomach cramped with pain, but he smiled at his mother and said he wasn't hungry. Sajid, however, knew the truth: there wasn't enough food. Days passed, and hunger became a constant guest in their home. At first, Sajid tried to ignore it. He drank water to trick his stomach, tried to go to bed early to forget the emptiness inside. But soon, his body began to signal distress, his legs weakened, his head ached, and his vision blurred. He tried to focus on his studies, but the letters on the blackboard swam before his eyes. His teacher noticed. Bilal was an observant man. He always paid attention to details. He understood something was wrong with the boy. Sajid was quieter than usual, his gaze vacant. And one day, the inevitable happened. Sajid collapsed in class. The silence was deafening. Bilal rushed to the boy. Seeing his pale, lifeless face, he scooped him into his arms and carried him to the staff room. He cast a quick glance at the school caretaker and commanded, "Run to the market. Buy some food." The caretaker immediately obeyed. A few minutes later, he returned with a hamburger and lemonade. When Sajid took his first bite, his eyes closed in pure pleasure. The taste, the texture, the warmth of the food filled his empty stomach. It was the most delicious meal he had ever tasted in his life. Bilal, frozen in indecision, watched the boy intently, a poignant ache in his chest over Sajid's fate. How could a child find himself in such dire straits? Was the world truly so cruel? A wave of anger rose within Bilal, but it was quickly overshadowed by overwhelming compassion. When Sajid finished his meal, Bilal gently touched his shoulder and asked with genuine concern, "Would you like to share with me what's happening in your life?" Sajid, feeling awkward, hesitated at first, but then, gathering his courage, he revealed the truth, about his mother, exhausted from toil, about the sleepless, hungry nights, about the tormenting hunger that plagued his family. Bilal listened carefully to every word the boy spoke, without interruption or judgment. And when Sajid finished his story, Bilal made a decision that would change their lives forever. That day, Bilal not only drove Sajid home but also stepped across the threshold of his humble dwelling. He was met with a disheartening sight, an empty kitchen, gleaming dishes that were essentially unused due to the lack of food. In Sajid's mother's eyes, there was a profound sadness, reflecting the weariness of a woman who had fought desperately for survival but was on the verge of despair. Without a second's hesitation, Bilal performed an act of immense generosity. He rushed to the market and bought huge sacks filled to the brim with essential provisions: rice, flour, sugar, lentils, oil, everything that could sustain the family and help them survive the difficult period. But his benevolence was not limited to a one-time aid. Bilal made a firm promise: from then on, every month, he would personally ensure that this household would never again lack food. Sajid's mother, unable to hold back her tears, looked at Bilal with an expression of deep gratitude mixed with disbelief. How could a complete stranger show such genuine care for their family? Bilal, offering her a warm smile, uttered just one sentence: "Sometimes true bonds arise not from blood relation, but from the depths of the heart." He could not have imagined that this noble act would forever change Sajid's destiny. Bilal's promise was not an empty one, tossed to the wind. Every month, he consistently appeared at Sajid's doorstep with generous supplies. With each visit, he brought more and more: fresh fruit, succulent meat, and new clothes for Sajid and his younger sister. The positive changes were swift. The boy's face, once pale and emaciated, gradually gained a healthy glow, and a genuine smile appeared more frequently on his lips. However, hunger was not the only enemy plaguing Sajid. His soul was still tormented by scars of fear and insecurity. Who could guarantee that Bilal would continue to help them? What if one day he vanished from their lives, like so many others had when they needed support the most? Sajid had learned from bitter experience about the world's unpredictability and how people often abandon those in need. But Bilal proved to be entirely different, unlike the rest. The professor became a constant and reliable friend to Sajid, like a lighthouse illuminating the path in the darkness. One evening, while poring over a textbook, Sajid asked a question that echoed in the quiet room: "Why are you doing all of this for us?" Bilal smiled, but a shadow flickered in his eyes, hinting at a story he wasn't yet ready to tell. Instead of a direct answer, he simply touched the boy's shoulder and said, "Because once, someone did the same for me." Sajid asked no more questions, but those words resonated deeply within him. He began to see Bilal with different eyes, not just as a teacher, not as a generous stranger, but as a man carrying an invisible burden on his shoulders. Months passed, and Sajid gradually transformed into a completely different person, stronger, more confident, and goal-oriented. He eagerly absorbed knowledge from the books Bilal had given him, soaking in every word and lesson. If attending school had once been a painful obligation, he now pursued new knowledge with undisguised enthusiasm. But something far more profound was happening, something even Bilal couldn't have foreseen. Bilal's kindness had a truly transformative effect on Sajid. He began helping other students in difficult situations, sharing what he had, and offering support when it was within his power. The boy who had once thought only of survival now sought to change the world for the better, as if the light ignited within him by Bilal was spreading to everyone around him. However, fate, always unpredictable and cunning, dislikes stories that unfold in a straight line. And just when it seemed everything had finally settled, something unexpected occurred, a turn of events that would test how far Bilal and Sajid's strengths could reach. Time relentlessly moved forward, and with it, Sajid changed. The boy, once timid and hungry, had transformed into a determined young man, eager for knowledge and new opportunities. Bilal was more than just a teacher to him, he was a guide, a mentor, and an anchor that kept him from falling into the abyss of despair. But even the most reliable anchors have their limits. Bilal had vowed that Sajid would never go to bed hungry again, but he understood perfectly that food and shelter alone were not enough to fundamentally change a person's life. He dreamed of a greater future for the boy. That's why he took an unexpected step. He applied for a scholarship for Sajid at a prestigious foreign university. This news hit Sajid's home like a bolt from the blue. "Mom, how can I leave all this behind?" he asked anxiously. But Bilal was adamant, "This is your chance, Sajid, your only chance. If you miss this opportunity, another may never present itself." Sajid spent sleepless nights pondering this difficult decision. He understood that moving to another country meant drastic changes in his life. But he also knew that if he stayed, his fate would be predetermined. On the day of his departure, standing at the airport, Sajid's mother took his trembling hands in hers and, with tears in her eyes, said, "You are our hope." He boarded the plane without looking back, but with every beat of his heart, he heard the voices of his mother, his sister, and most importantly, Bilal, the man who had never abandoned him in times of trouble, the man who taught him that true strength lies not in physical might, but in an unwavering will to live and a relentless drive to never give up. In a foreign land, harsh trials awaited him, things he had never before contemplated. An unfamiliar language, alien customs, and oppressive loneliness descended upon him with full force. Yet, he absorbed an undeniable truth: pain subsides with time, but resilience of spirit ensures forever. He devoted himself to his studies with unprecedented zeal. While other students indulged in parties, he spent hours in the library. While his peers lingered in bed, he delved into textbooks. Time for him was no longer a luxury to be carelessly squandered. The sharp change in the young man's life was truly dramatic. The one who once meticulously counted pennies to buy a crust of bread now shone among the university's top students. The one who had once fainted from hunger during a lecture now presented his academic work to renowned professors. And then, something incredible happened. At a university event, a prominent entrepreneur attended Sajid's lecture. Impressed by the young man's extraordinary intellect and life story, he offered him an internship that, under favorable circumstances, could lead to a permanent job. Sajid accepted without hesitation. He wasn't just building his future, he was fulfilling his family's dream and making a silent promise to Bilal. Thus, over time, the boy who had once starved transformed into a successful young man with a salary he had never dared to dream of. He had achieved much, but something still unsettled him. It was only when he glanced at the calendar and saw an approaching date that he realized what was missing. It was time to return home. Upon landing on his home soil, Sajid did not rush home. He headed straight for Bilal. However, when he finally found him, he couldn't hold back tears. The man who had once been his pillar of support and protector now appeared frail and weary. The years had left their indelible mark on him. Sajid felt a lump rise in his throat. How could the one who had given everything for him be in such a pitiful state? He vowed to himself that this would change and immediately took action. Without losing a minute, Sajid took Bilal to the city's best clinic and ensured that the professor received the best doctors and the most modern treatment. For the first time in years, Bilal didn't have to worry about bills, food, or survival. Now he was being cared for by the very boy he had once saved from starvation. Life had come full circle. Accompanying Bilal to the hospital, Sajid reflected on what had transpired. The exhausted boy, barely able to stand in school, had transformed into a man capable of changing the lives of those who had helped him. But he understood that this wasn't enough, merely repaying Bilal wasn't sufficient. He needed to repay the entire world. With this thought in mind, Sajid initiated an educational project for children from low-income families, ensuring that no boy or girl would face the same hardships he had endured. He aimed not just to distribute food, but to provide opportunities, education, support, and a real chance for a dignified future. Bilal, recovering, watched with tears in his eyes. He had never helped Sajid expecting anything in return. But seeing the young man continue his work was the greatest reward he could have dreamed of. On the project's opening day, Sajid delivered a speech that resonated with everyone present. As a child, I was saved by the kindness of one person. Today, I want that kindness to multiply. Let no child have to choose between education and food. Let no one fight alone, because I realized that in the end, it's not money that changes lives, but people. The audience erupted in applause. Bilal, in the crowd, smiled proudly. He had planted a seed and now saw an entire forest grow. Thus, the story that began with pain and despair concluded with hope and transformation. Sajid proved that true gratitude is expressed not in words, but in actions, and that a simple act of kindness can echo in the hearts of generations to come.